Alright YouTube, so we are back talking about some Final Fantasy VII and also the remake, and also this is actually a follow-up to our last video where we talked about the literally doesn't make sense about Cloud killing Sephiroth, or defeating Sephiroth, however you want to look at it. So what we're going to be talking about in this video is an interesting theory that was posed in the comments of my previous video, and also I guess another theory that's been discussed by another YouTuber. But before we hop into that, I want to do my own particular follow-up to the previous video. It's actually something I forgot to mention, and it does seem like Cloud stabbing Sephiroth with the Buster Sword did significant damage. And what I mean by that is whenever we come across the actual Sephiroth in the Northern Cave in the original Final Fantasy VII, he does not have a lower half to his body. Same thing whenever it comes to his god forms that we fight at the end of the game. At least he doesn't have a regular lower half to his body, he doesn't have legs. And I believe the implication here is that Cloud did cut him in half with the Buster Sword, because all this takes place right before he goes to the Northern Cave. Like, Cloud, picks him up whenever he's stabbed, as we talked about in the last video, throws him off to the side, he falls down into the Mako, which is the live stream, and gets carried to the Northern Cave, where we find him years later at the end of FF7. I've always noticed that whenever we come across the actual Sephiroth in the original FF7, that he's missing the lower half to his body, but I never made the connection until the other day making that video. I just forgot to talk about it. But this only adds to the argument I was making in that previous video about it not making any sense. If you were able to pierce Sephiroth's skin with the Buster Sword being wider than his torso, he should have been cut in half, which it seems like that's the implication here. And if it is, then it just adds to the fact that that whole scene doesn't make any goddamn sense. Sephiroth should have been two pieces on the floor right in front of Genova's chamber, or at the very least he couldn't have been up walking around like he was and like stabbing Cloud on the ground and picking him up and shit. Like, he'd have been mostly cut in half. So anyways, moving past that, the theory that we're talking about today is the Whisperers, the Watchmen of Fate, the Arbiters of Fate, helping Cloud in that altercation with Sephiroth. I had a couple comments about this, which is why I wanted to discuss it. We had different people with similar ideas. The thing is, for the remake, this definitely could work, because obviously the altercation between Cloud and Sephiroth, the Nibelheim incident, that all took place in the past prior to the events of this first game, so the Watchmen of Fate were still around. But by the end of the first game, of course, we kill all the Whisperers, so they're not there anymore. But again, since that took place in the past, they could have been present to prevent Cloud from dying and give him that strength to defeat Sephiroth in the moment. Now, as for them being present in the original FF7 or Crisis Core, they're simply not. They're a new thing. The remake is its own timeline. I did a whole video about this, about talking about the end game and the meaning and stuff like that. The Watchmen of Fate, the remake, it's all in a separate timeline. That's why you see different things happen in the remake that did not happen in the original, like only Jesse dying during the Platefall segment, and Biggs living and possibly Wedge living as well. Then also Sephiroth stabbing Barrett, but Barrett not actually dying from that. And also things like Zack surviving the fight with the Shinra army, which obviously this is where he died in the original story, and the different stamp logos for Shinra. Pretty much everything prior to the remake project is in its own timeline or universe. So before Crisis, Crisis Core, FF7, Dirge of Cerberus, Advent Children, that's all quote-unquote Universe 1, the remake project, Universe 2. The point of mentioning all this is that when it came to the original FF7 and when it came to Crisis Core, when we look at the Nibelheim incident and Cloud and Sephiroth fighting, there was not this unseen force there helping him. The Watchmen of Fate, the Whisperers, they were not present. But I do think when it comes to the remake games, when we get that inevitable Nibelheim incident flashback, I think the Whisperers are a good way to explain how Cloud was able to overcome Sephiroth in that moment, because it was destiny that he did. Hopping back to Jimmy Bob's comment, I want to touch on something really quickly. He mentions how, I guess there's a theory out there from another channel called, I think Sleep Easy is how you pronounce it, that the Watchmen of Fate had been hinted at before with Dirge of Cerberus. So I'm not exactly sure which video he's talking about, and these videos are long as hell. One of them's almost 2 hours long. I love long-form content on YouTube, but I'm not going to sit through and watch all these to try to track down this one particular theory or scene that he's talking about. And also, I haven't done anything with Dirge of Cerberus in a very, very long time, so I'm not even sure the particular scene he's talking about, but apparently Reeve and Vincent are talking, and Reeve talks about a haunting feeling he has, and I guess his theory is that that's the Watchmen of Fate. But as we talked about previously, that simply just is not the case. The remake, the Watchmen of Fate, all that stuff is taking place in a completely different timeline. And I realize they're called Whisperers, but I keep calling them the Watchmen of Fate. That's what we're told they were called in the early days of the remake, like early 2019. That's just what I've always known them as, and I can't stop calling them that. But even if we want to go with the idea that FF7 and FF7 Remake somehow take place in the same timeline, the Whisperers wouldn't even be present for Dirge of Cerberus. We kill them at the end of the Midgar segment. Dirge of Cerberus picks up right at the end of the FF7 story. They wouldn't even be around for Dirge of Cerberus. Don't get me wrong, I love fan theories and stuff like that, but it's literally impossible for the Whisperers to be around during Dirge of Cerberus. Something I forgot to mention earlier in case you don't know about the theory or didn't watch my Indian Explained video or whatever the case, the Whisperers are there to keep the story online with the original FF7. That's why when things are different, like right here in this scene, whenever Cloud's just about to kill Reno, which didn't happen in the original game, the Whisperers show up and carry him and Aerith away. And the reason they intervene is because if Reno were to die right there, it would throw off Destiny, right? He wouldn't be there for the drop of Sector 7, for example. And that's why when it comes to the remake, I do think that the Whispers are a good way to explain how Cloud defeats Sephiroth in that moment. We can still use the Whispers with any sort of flashbacks. Obviously, those are taking place in the past. And since we're talking about it right now, and we haven't talked about this in at least a few months now, I am excited for Remake Part 2, man. I'm excited to see what they do since we killed the Whispers at the end of the game. The Whispers are not there to keep the original story in line. I don't know what they're going to do, man. It's going to be crazy. But anyways, dudes, that is the video I want to pass off to you guys in the comment section. When it comes to the Remake project, when we get that inevitable Nibelheim incident flashback, Cloud and Sephiroth fighting, do you think they're going to use the Whispers to explain that, or do you think they're going to leave it just pretty much the same? Leave your thoughts and more in the comment section below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys already want to stay updated with more Final Fantasy 7 and Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @dashingdavid. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.